Today on the Save the Gen Z, I discuss parental rights, Bill C-6, and education with Tanya Granic Allen.
Persons may recognize me from my voice when I lent it to the repealing the radical sexual education curriculum. That was supposed to happen. Unfortunately, it did not here in Ontario. But we've seen even on the federal level with things like Bill C-6, the so-called conversion therapy ban, where again, the government is trying to interfere or get in between a parent and child relationship. And this was also a big concern with some of the sex ed curriculum resources that are being used, like in Ontario, like with the SOGI in British Columbia, is that are we actually being abusive to the children in the classroom by showing them material or teaching them material that they simply cannot handle? I don't believe a small group of people should dictate what children should learn. I believe parents should dictate what they should learn. And if anything, that consultation was deeply flawed. Why didn't Doug Ford should have, and I suggested this to them, they should send a letter home with every child to their parent. I mean, they have schools, they have access to thousands of kids, hundreds of thousands of kids, millions of kids. Send a letter home with a survey and have the parent answer the survey and simply hand it in that way.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today, my guest is Tanya Granic Allen. She is a devoted parental rights activist who is a former head of Parents as First Educators. She ran in the 2018 Ontario PC leadership race, and many say she influenced Doug Ford to revisit the sexual health curriculum. Recently, she announced a new endeavor, her own show, Counterpoint, on Canada's newest conservative TV station, the News Forum. I am very pleased to be joined by her today to discuss important issues around parents, children, and families. So let's get right to it. Before we get started with our interview, please subscribe if you haven't already and consider hitting that notification bell. Well, Tanya, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on. I love chatting with up and coming conservatives. It's a great thing.
All right, so before we start discussing parental rights, let's talk about what you've been up to recently. You took on a new endeavor with your show Counterpoint on the News Forum. So, why don't you tell us a bit about your new show and what attracted you to television?
Okay, well, first of all, the News Forum is a brand new conservative-friendly news network that's on broadcast, and presently it is being shown on all the platforms of Bell, so cable television, the internet, or wherever Bell has its stuff, you can find the News Forum. It's also, I believe, on some aspects of the TELUS network as well. So it's a very exciting time. Many persons out there, especially conservative leaning, will complain on occasion that there sometimes is a void of conservative friendly voices in the media, or those who want to provide, say, that a balanced perspective. So we seek to provide that balance. And when I was approached to see if I wanted to bring my voice to the network, I thought it would be a great opportunity to highlight some issues that matter to Canadians that perhaps they don't hear from the traditional broadcasters. So it's been, obviously COVID has made it more challenging to launch because we were supposed to launch in March and then COVID hit. So it's been a dynamic situation and one that I'm grateful for the opportunity, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I've seen a couple of the episodes and I think it looks very, very nice. So yeah, I think it's going to be a success. So let's dive right into the issue of parental rights. Can you describe what exactly are parental rights and why they are important, not only for Canadian families, but for Canadian society as a whole?
Sure. Well, the family is really the building block of society. And through my many years as an advocate for family, I used to attend many conferences at the United Nations. And when I was there, I recall, reading, for example, the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, and listed there in Section 26 is the right of parents to direct their children's education. And even at the conferences dealing with children's rights, the UNICEF-sponsored conferences, again, the role of the parents, how important it is, and hearing from various stakeholders of the sort. So parents, really, their responsibility are their children, and they really should and get to guide most of those decisions for the children's upbringing. Of course, sometimes in coordination with, say, medical professionals and whatnot. So parental rights are important. They help guide the child. They get to share their moral perspective on life, share their traditions. For example, one of the scourges, if you will, on some of our Canadian, I shouldn't say scourge, but obviously a stain in Canadian history, and of course that's up for debate, but was residential schools, where we saw children being removed from their parents against their parental rights. And the traditions of that family were not able to be perpetuated, were not able to be carried forth. So children thrive best within their home environment. And when we have parents able to fulfill their duties as parents, and to be able to pass on their love and their emotion and their tradition and their history and their morality, that's when we see a wonderfully functioning society.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you brought up a good point with the relation to residential schools, how the government thought they were better than parents. When Faitine Grasseshi was on this show, she said, anytime the government says we know better than parents, it becomes a dangerous situation. And I couldn't agree more.
I agree. And we've seen through the last, and sadly, in an increasingly alarming rate, we've seen various provincial and federal government initiatives across this country, coast to coast, who seem to be tabling or bring forth legislation that seeks to interfere with the parent-child relationship. And that has been a big problem. So I've been a parental and children's rights advocate for quite some time. I'm a mother of 5 children myself. That aside, obviously, a lot of persons may recognize me from my voice when I lent it to the repealing the radical sexual education curriculum. That was supposed to happen. Unfortunately, it did not here in Ontario. But we've seen even on the federal level with things like Bill C-6, the so-called conversion therapy ban, where again, the government is trying to interfere or get in between a parent and child relationship. And, do I think there's an agenda there? I don't know. What I do know, though, is the government should be there to support the parents and children and not interfere.
This could potentially ban certain conversations. Some people have raised concerns about prayers, Bible studies, talk therapies, and even these transition treatments being banned, and people like parents and pastors and social workers facing jail time if they violate this bill. If this bill is passed unamended, how do you think that it will impact children, parents, and families, especially in a day where, as you previously mentioned, kids are being taught gender fluid theory in elementary school?
Well, I think whether this bill is amended or not, there are huge concerns. Number one is, first of all, abuse is abuse, violence is violence. If there's any abuse or any violence being practiced anywhere, we don't need a new legislation to block that. That exists already within the criminal code. So there should never be any kind of abusive violent therapies if there so exists. And from the guests I've had on my show discussing this issue of C-6, there doesn't exist to be such kinds of therapies, or maybe they were practiced 60, 70 years ago, but that Canada 60, 70 years ago is not Canada today, and thankfully. And you mentioned one thing though, and I want to clarify. You said you found this is a very alarming piece of legislation, and it's unprecedented in Canada, but I should actually point out, first of all, 1/3 of Canadians live in Ontario, and in Ontario we've had a similar piece of legislation passed. And it was actually sponsored by our current Minister of Health here in Ontario, Christine Elliott, back in 2015. And it was called Bill 77. So already in Ontario, now parents aren't being jailed, but already in Ontario, there exists such a piece of legislation and did pass. So we've seen this already. And people like Dr. Kenneth Zucker had his practice shut down because they basically delisted all these therapies from being engaged with from parents and whatnot. But again, let's just boil it down to this. If you're a parent, first of all, adults can do what they like. I believe that with adults, I mean, if somebody wants to go seek out some kind of therapy and that's their choice, I mean, that's their
Yeah,
business. I'm not gonna,
absolutely.
I don't know if they want to change this, change that. I don't know. That's their business and they can do what they like. My concern is children, minors. If a parent has a gender dysphoric child, and it happens, I know people who have gender dysphoric children, and that's a conversation that needs to evolve. That's an organic conversation a parent needs to have with their child, and they need to be able to use whatever resources they can to help their child thrive best in life. And I don't think there is anybody, not me, not a government, who should come in between that parent-child relationship, especially in that situation that might require more attention. So that being said, if there is a parent who has a gender dysphoric child, that, like I said, that conversation is ongoing. And yes, they should be able to work with a therapist, with a counselor, to see what the right path forward is. We've seen studies come out of the UK. In fact, there was a recent landmark court case in the UK that seems to suggest that no, minors should not engage in hormonal therapies and sex change surgeries while they are minors. Wait till they are adults and let them decide there, because there's some statistic, I believe it's in the high 80s, low 90s% of children who are gender dysphoric revert to their biological sex, or their sex assigned at birth, whatever language you'd like to use, by the time they come out of adolescence. So I always tell people, don't rush into things, don't rush into marriage, don't rush into this, don't, just calm, see how things are, take it day by day, and let that conversation evolve. And I think the parent is the best person in that situation to guide that process.
Yeah, you brought a lot of very good points there. And I would have to say, with people around my age transitioning, I also don't think it's a good idea. I spoke to my former principal a few years ago when the whole sex ed controversy was happening. And basically what she told me is she knew a girl who was feeling unpopular, who needed attention. So she decided to transition, only to regret it a few years later, and basically wrecked her whole entire body. And she knew this other girl who wanted to transition, and she told the parents, wait till she's 18. And you know what? This girl is now a happy woman. So,
and, different people will have different experiences, and I appreciate that. And that's why I think, like I said, it's best to let the parents work with the child. It's their child, and see what, because they know the whole history, they know the whole medical history, they know the personality of the child, and sometimes that does play into it and factor in.
Absolutely. So an issue that Canadians are finally talking about this week is the harms of the porn industry. Currently, only 3% of porn sites have proper age verification systems, and about 95% of boys are exposed to porn before becoming an adult. The average age of exposure is 11, and in some places it's actually 8. Would you, as a parent and as a parental rights activist, support more harsh new regulations on the porn industry? Because, you know, if a kid can't buy a beer, a pack of cigarettes, or a joint, why should they be able to access millions of harmful pornographic images and videos?
Well, Ali, thank you for bringing that up, and I think you've phrased it very well. I do believe they are harmful, and studies have showed the neurological effects on pornography, how it affects your brain, and how one can become addicted to pornography. And you're right, the average age for the first viewing of pornography is becoming less and less. I actually saw a statistic that said something like, I think 80 or 90% of children by the time they're 13 have viewed some level of pornography. And then who can forget that scandalous film, I guess I would call it, completely inappropriate, Cuties, that was on Netflix this summer, where there were 2,000 girls auditioning for these roles, being directed to perform in a certain provocative way. I mean, that's production of child pornography right there. So I would support tighter and more stricter regulations. There should be zero child pornography. Children should not be viewing pornography. If a child is shown material that is beyond their capability of comprehension, that is actually child abuse, and that abuse must stop. And this was also a big concern with some of the sex ed curriculum resources that are being used, like in Ontario, like with the SOGI in British Columbia, is that are we actually being abusive to the children in the classroom by showing them material or teaching them material that they simply cannot handle. And that is really, I think, the crux of the matter. And I would argue yes. A lot of experts would argue yes, but of course there are those on the other side who will say, you know, they should be able to see this. So I know there are proponents of people who want children to view pornography. I will never be one of those. I have 5 children of my own. I don't see the benefit of my child seeing child pornography. And the sooner the government can bring in tighter regulations, I think that would be a great day.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's unfortunate. When I was doing some research on this recently, I found articles, and there's activists, they want a sex ed to be people watching porn. That idea completely disgusts me. I would never send my kids to a school where that happens, period.
Well, sadly, Ellie, this could be very well happening at your school. And I say that because a lot of schools, as we found out through various incident reports, they have unmanaged internet filters. So they're not filtering harmful content within the school's internet wide capabilities. So when you're not protecting and filtering your internet within a school setting, can you only imagine what the children are accessing? And we have heard horror stories.
Yeah, that's horrible. Luckily, I go to a Christian school, so everything that is bad is censored. But
okay,
I've
well,
actually heard.
I hope they keep it up to date.
Yeah, I do. But I've actually heard that I had a friend who went to a school, so the Conservative Party of Canada's website was blocked, but not the porn sites. And I'm like, what? That doesn't make any sense, right? So this is where I kind of, the standards of what's right and wrong kind of just completely fall apart. So you were, as you said earlier, a strong voice in the fight to reform Kathleen Wynne's radical sexual health curriculum. And some say it's thanks to you that Doug Ford ended up taking on this issue. So Doug Ford and his government did wide consultations with students and parents, and they actually found that while most people wanted it to be more age appropriate, most people wanted the content to stay. So when Doug Ford put out the new curriculum based on consultations, you weren't happy, and you said that he was a liar. So while I personally do agree with you that certain things should have been removed completely, why do you think that? Do you think it's appropriate for a small group of people to dictate what all of Ontario's students should learn, especially since the government has given parents the complete power to just pull their kids out of class the day that sex ed is being taught?
Okay, so let me correct the record here on a few things. So number one, I believe I said Doug Ford lied, and it's because he did. He said he would repeal the Kathleen Wynne sex ed curriculum. And just for everybody's knowledge, it's 100% intact in the classrooms right now. There was a court case while Doug was temporarily repealing it until he brought in his new version, which was basically Kathleen Wynne's 2.0, where the Minister of Education, the Deputy Minister of Education said under oath, teachers can use whatever resource they want from whichever curriculum they want and teach anything at any grade at any time. They just can't test on it until it's in that prescribed grade. So right now, teachers have carte blanche to do whatever the heck they want in their classroom as it relates to sex ed, even use the entire Kathleen Wynne sex ed. So anything goes. It may in fact be even worse than it was when Kathleen Wynne was under, because at least you kind of knew what grades things were happening. That's number one. Number two is I don't believe a small group of people should dictate what children should learn. I believe parents should dictate what they should learn. And if anything, that consultation was deeply flawed. Why didn't Doug Ford should have, and I suggested this to them, they should send a letter home with every child to their parent. I mean, they have schools, they have access to thousands of kids, hundreds of thousands of kids, millions of kids. Send a letter home with a survey and have the parent answer the survey and simply hand it in that way. But to have it done online, where we know that there were people who sat in internet cafes and literally sat in and filled in survey after survey after survey. All you needed to give your opinion on this matter was an email address. People created multiple email addresses, and even after I even have evidence of this, after it was closed, the consultation, people were still filling in surveys. So I don't know who these people were that filled out the survey. What I do know is the easiest way to do it would have been to send a survey home with each child in the province through the public school system, and the government simply didn't do it, and instead they rushed through and opened up what I think is, what's been very clearly said in court is it's now in fact a worse situation, and there is no opt-out. I know that's a tough one to say because people said, oh no, there's this new opt-out. How do you opt out of a curriculum if you don't know what date's being taught? If you're not given advance notice? How do you opt out of random class discussions? in math class. And we do know that there are some teachers who bring up sexual education in various topics like math. There was one, I believe in Peel region actually, who was bragging about how she teaches sexuality in her math lessons. So how does a parent, how can you opt your kid out of something if you don't know when it's happening? So again, it's a symbolic opt-out, but it's not a meaningful opt-out. And at the end of the day, parents just want they want to be in charge of what their kids learn, and that's the right we have. So it's in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. So it's sad that Doug Ford flip-flopped. I was very disappointed. One of his two campaign promises, really his primary ones, was to repeal the sex ed and to stop the carbon tax, and it seems both of those have kind of gone nowhere.
No, you're right. I actually didn't know some of the things you just said, but that is somewhat concerning. And yeah, I mean, now he has a carbon tax, made an Ontario carbon tax, and sex ed. Apparently, the carbon tax new one is worse, and the sex ed that's worst. So I gotta ask you this question now. So you did run for the leadership of the PC party, and you were supposed to be the Mississauga Centre PC candidate. You won a fair nomination.
Well, I was the candidate for a while, yes.
Until the left pressured Doug Ford to cancel you for having a traditional view of marriage, I believe it was. And if you hadn't been canceled and you had been elected and to be part of Doug Ford's PC caucus, would you have still spoken out against the new curriculum, him removing Belinda Carvalho's and his new lockdown policies?
Oh, well, I can't speak in hypothetics. What I do know is, it was obviously a dark day in democracy, and for democracy when a political leader decides to remove a democratically elected candidate. Mm-hmm. So that was that kind of gave maybe foreshadowed of things to come. So I was not surprised that he ended up removing Belinda Carvalho's. I was the first, and then I think there are a couple others who came after me.
Yes.
I was hoping though that he would have repealed the sex ed curriculum, and I guess I would have, accepted the way things were. I don't think anybody should ever cave into the mob when the mob comes. I commented on a situation in a post-communist country, thousands of kilometers away. It's my father's country of Croatia. So yeah, I did have some terse words for Marxism and communist dictates separating the family. And if they wanted to misconstrue it, and that's their business. But at the end of the day, I think I will always be a voice for freedom. I will always be a voice for democracy. I think Canada needs more voices like that. I'm happy to hear that you're doing this excellent project. And, I look for the day when hopefully, I still hold out hope that Doug Ford will, bring things back to a more democratic mode here in Ontario, mm-hmm. But I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Yeah, for sure. I do have to ask you this because I asked Andrew Lawton this question when he was on. Would you have voted in favor of Bill 195?
Absolutely not. I never will vote for anything that's in favor of eliminating our civil liberties and rights. If there's an emergency situation, that's fine, but that was done with a hefty majority. And I believe that if there's a good piece of legislation that have to follow the democratic process, I want all sides and all voices chiming in, because look, not one party knows the best way to do something. I believe in total party collaboration. You reach across the aisle and you work with people and let the best ideas win. I think that's important.
No, I agree. And I think what we're seeing right now with COVID is a complete eradication of proper democracy. I mean, we have these appointed doctors who have complete veto power, making all these decisions. I mean, nobody ever voted for these people. Doug Ford's new bills, in the UK, the lockdown was a vote in the House of Commons, and they weren't able to extend it because of, backbencher backlash. So that's a prime example of democracy. If the UK had a Bill 195, they would probably still be locked down right now.
Yes, most can't have bills 195, but here we have in Ontario, and I hope hopefully we will be out of the situation sooner than later.
Mm-hmm, for sure. So let's end off this interview with a question of faith. I know you're a devoted Catholic. Can you share how your faith has guided you in your daily life and through, your attempts at politics, in your show, and being a parent, etc.?
Well, I think like most Canadians, I believe in God. Most Canadians, profess a faith and attend some kind of religious service. So I do, and I'm a Catholic, and I think, those basic Judeo-Christian principles of love your neighbor, don't kill someone, think about things before you act. The end doesn't justify the means. Those basic moral theological principles are very important. And I think, as a parent, I want my faith tradition passed on. That's something I choose to do, and I'm glad to do that. How they live as adults, that's going to be up to them. And I think, it does obviously influence me. I think, this country was founded on Judeo-Christian principles,
Hmm.
and so many of the things I believe in align very closely with the Canadian beliefs. And it's something that was very popular, especially amongst the new immigrant community. A lot of immigrants come to Canada because their faith is persecuted in their homeland, or they lived under tyranny or under Marxism, where they were not allowed to practice their faith. And I think freedom of religion is very important, and that's why I'm trying to be as outspoken as possible on that front. So, my father came from a communist country, and there were limitations on his practice of faith, and I think that was instilled in me growing up, that if you believe something, fight strongly for it, because at any point someone could come and try to take that away. And I think, thanks be to God, we live in Canada, knock on wood, that'll remain a country that's still full of freedom and full of goodness, and that people can come and practice their faith freely.
Absolutely, I totally agree. It's wonderful that all the freedoms we have here, and we can worship and not be scared of persecution. That's wonderful.
Right.
Well, Tanya, I want to thank you so much for joining me today for this discussion, and I wish you the best of luck with your new show.
Thank you so much, Ellie, and thank you for what you're doing. It's great to have some young conservative voices jump on the scene.
I hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Saved Gen Z podcast. To learn more about Tanya Granic Allen, check the links in the description. Make sure to also subscribe, as more episodes are coming soon. And feel free to check out the other episodes of this podcast on YouTube. Thank you, and God bless.